Hey, let's open in a word of prayer. Sorry for I wasn't watching my prompt back there. So let's pray. Lord, thanks for this day. We pray that you'll bless our time together as we discuss some of the things going on in the world. And just pray you'll edify our hearts in what appear to be very difficult times. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, I'm going to talk about the convergence part, and you can put in the number because I talk about it every week, so I've lost track of how many times I've talked about convergence. And some of the things we're looking at each week are acceleration, convergence, logistics, and understanding. We understand that this is part of a pattern in Bible prophecy. When Jesus came the first time, and remember, the patterns that existed at the first time will be the patterns that existed at his second coming. So when he came, there were many prophecies that needed to be fulfilled. But the prophecies regarding his first coming, about 60%, actually 59% of them were fulfilled in that last week, what we call the Passion Week. So we would expect that as we get closer to the second coming, there will be an acceleration, a convergence of all these prophecies being fulfilled. My view also is that if the spring feasts were fulfilled in exact date order at the time of his first coming, the fall feasts that are going to be fulfilled at the time of his second coming are going to be fulfilled in exact same date order. They're going to be that far apart. They're not going to be years and years apart. Now, it may be that there's going to be partial fulfillments before that, but the final fulfillment of those will all be in that compressed time at the end in the period of time in the fall feast. Another verse that we talk about a lot, which talks about the understanding that we'll get as we get closer to the end, is in Daniel chapter 12. And I heard, but I understood not. Then said I, O my Lord, what shall be the end of these things? And he said, Go thy way, Daniel, for the words are closed up and sealed till the time of the end. And many shall be purified and made white and tried, but the wicked shall do wickedly, and none of the wicked shall understand, but the wise shall understand. And in Daniel 11, it also talks about the fact that the wise who understand will instruct many. So what I get from that is not everybody's going to understand. There's going to need to be people who are going to instruct many as, this is what's happening. This is exactly what was prophesied. And at some point, there will be people standing up in pulpits somewhere, and they'll be saying, this is that which was prophesied. Now, I'm not sure that we're there yet. For example, I use this example of my view of how the horsemen, the first four seals, unfold. It's interesting. I belong to a number of prophecy Facebook groups and other forums where people discuss Bible prophecy. And I want to say this. I see a lot of people who love the Lord. They love Bible prophecy. I've also said this, that I don't agree with this assertion that there are 35,000 Christian denominations or 40,000. I just don't think that's true. But if it comes to eschatology, 80,000 is a pretty low number in different denominations because everybody has an opinion. And I want to make it clear, I disagree strongly with a lot of people. We're talking about future events. Future events are not yet concrete facts. They've not happened yet. So we need to be a little bit humble. And I see tremendous amounts of vitriol being thrown around on these forums. Well, if you don't have my understanding of the timing of the rapture, I wonder if you're saved. And I just think that that's a problem. And I understand, but look, people work hard on trying to piece together things. And I understand, I do too. I study a lot. I read a lot of different views, a lot of views that I'm pretty sure right out of the box I don't agree with. And I'm pretty sure it's not going to work out that way. But I'll give you an example. I was looking, as I was preparing for my talks in Scotland a few weeks ago, I just happened to come across some emails, a series of emails from one person. I have no doubt, by the way, I have no doubt that this person is saved, is a believer, is a brother in Christ. And his point was, listen, John, you're almost there. You need to understand you're very, very close And what he was saying was, you're very, very close to seeing it my way. And I'm going to now tell you, and you're going to see it my way, because the second coming is going to happen in 2024. Therefore, the tribulation period will start in 2017. This was an email I received in late 2016. And the person was certain that the Lord would return. Now, I'm certain that the Lord has not. I can look around in the world and I can see that, but I can see a lot of the markers of his coming. Jesus said in Matthew chapter 24, take heed that no man deceive you. And he said that more than anything else. And boy, do we see a lot of deception going on. I don't have the statistics in front of me. I saw a recent survey from Barna, who does a pretty good job. And the point that he made in that interview, I think it was on CBN this week, was there's not a lot of people who claim to be Christians that believe basic tenets of the Christian faith, like sin and the necessity of a Savior, and hell, and heaven. And it's sort of like, why do they call themselves Christians? And so what's happened with purpose-driven church and the way that Rick Warren incorporated a lot of marketing ideas from, I can't remember the guy, Peter Drucker, who was not a Christian by any stretch of the imagination, but that this would be a way to grow the church. And what happened was, whether they like it or not, or whether they want to admit it or not, I watched it. I've been involved in the evangelical church for almost 70 years, which is all my life. And I've seen different trends. And the trends are that through marketing, unfortunately, the church became more of a social club. I remember once I was in Palm Springs, going to dinner with Ed Decker, great apologist, former Mormon, wrote some great books on Mormonism, and just a really solid, wonderful guy. And as we were driving to dinner, we passed this big church in the Palm Springs area, and he said, that's the biggest church here in the valley. And I was going to church there last Sunday. I got to tell you, John, the pastor was really bringing it. He was going great guns, and then the fog machine malfunctioned and kind of ruined everything. And his point, by being sarcastic, which I sort of like sarcasm, his humor made a great point that the church has changed. And so I see things like been watching a lot of videos. I don't know, I haven't checked. I think somebody unfriended me recently because they disagreed with me about Andy Stanley, or how I approached Andy Stanley. And I tried to make the point, I think I know Andy Stanley way better than you, because I've done many, many talks with him. I played many clips. I've read his books. I've watched his videos. I see what he does at his big conferences. And I've seen the damage, like his pushing of this occultic Enneagram thing that you see everywhere. I even saw it was promoted in a chapel down at Liberty University. By the way, I got invited to Liberty Law School Chapel after I spoke out about that. But this stuff has a huge impact, and this is the thing that Jesus warned us about. And it appears from his talks that Andy Stanley believes in the resurrection, I think, because he says, well, you just need the eyewitness testimony. But why is the resurrection important? Why was Jesus' death on the cross important? And you need all of the Bible to understand that. You can believe in the resurrection. You can believe in the finished work of Christ on the cross. But to get your understanding, to move beyond, remember what Hebrews says, beyond milk to the meat of the word, you have to look at all of the Bible, all of the text of Scripture. And there's this constant denigrating of different parts of the Bible. And I see this all across evangelicalism. So we have a major problem. So anyway, back to my point about the horses is, the seals will open. And I know as soon as I see this, I will get emails this week that say, the seals opened a long time ago. This has been happening for a while. And there's some people who say, well, the white horse has to be the Antichrist. But I don't necessarily see that in Scripture. I see the description of what happens. And so there's this increase in whatever happens under the first seal. He goes forth conquering what? And to conquer. So it doesn't say he goes forth and conquered or conquers everything right now. That's not what happens. It's a process over time. And they all sort of reach their apex, in my view, just before the second coming of the Lord. So when you get into the fourth seal, where it says he's given power over 1/4 of the earth to kill, I think it's the fourth seal, 1/4 of the earth. So there's different ways of interpreting that. So I have a friend, very learned guy, and he believes that 1/4 of the earth means that's the scope of the authority of this Antichrist. 1/4 of the earth is land. So he means he rules over all of the land and the earth. And, he makes a pretty compelling case. And others say, no, that means he kills 1/4 of the earth. And it happens before the abomination of desolation. But I don't see any marker if that's true, when that 1/4 is killed. And then you have to go into this, is why I talk about logistics. If you're going to kill 1/4 of the world, in today's terms, that's 2 billion people. And it's going to happen in what? A year and a half? How many people per day is that? And I don't think that that's what the passage says. I think the passage says he's given authority over 1/4 of the earth with ultimate authority to execute them if he desires. Doesn't say he executes all of them. And then others say, well, all of the seal and trumpets have to happen in this first 3.5 years before the abomination of desolation. I don't know, because these things will continue all the way till the Lord returns. That's my point. So we try to put everything into our box, and like this very nice guy who wrote to me, he wasn't mean or nasty or anything about that, I was very close to seeing things correctly and agreeing with him, that I'm sitting here 6 years later, 7 years later, and I'm pretty sure he wasn't right on the date. Now, I think we're getting close, and that was one of my talks. I think God gave time markers to Daniel with regard to things that would be happening and the general time of the first coming of Messiah. I think that there are time markers that may have been given regarding the second coming of Messiah, and I think we're getting into that season. That's what was one of my talks in Scotland. I think they're up at I don't know if they're up at RTN TV yet or not. Is this the season? And I really think this is the season, because there's just so much going on. So let's look at some of the things going on culturally and geopolitically, and I'm pretty confident that I'm going to trigger a lot of people today, because I'm going to try to give you factual information, but I can tell you it's hard to not give you what I think is factual information. And I understand there will be very good people who will disagree with me. Friends of mine will disagree with me. And so until we're absolutely sure that we can stand up in here and say, this is that which was prophesied, then I think we need to be watching, trying to understand in the scripture, in the word, in fellowship with others, to figure out what's going on. Because I think we can agree that it's a very confusing time to be alive. There's a lot of things out there that I see that just don't make sense. And I see a world, I see an economy, I see rise of globalism, I see a Middle East geopolitics that are just completely crazy. I don't know how else to describe it. Yet, in many respects, my life right now is fairly normal. I had pot roast last Sunday, I've mentioned it was pot roast Sunday, and we had leftover pot roast this week. So, and I will tell you, if you want the recipe, get it from my wife, because it was the best she's ever done. And that's in 48 years of her cooking that for me. Really, Now, I think she made a mistake in the way she cooked the potatoes, but they turned out really, really good. Almost a little bit, yeah, they were just great. So anyway, so let's talk about some of these things. So I'm going to give you a statement. This is Powerline. This is a blog by some Minnesota attorneys. I'm going to just read you a little bit about what they say. And so this is, the point is, who wrote this? And so it says this: leftism is a totalitarian force. Whenever leftism is in a position of power, it tends to invade every private owner and force every thought into a leftist mold. In part, this is because of the quasi-religious character of leftism. By the way, this thing was written probably over 40 years ago. Everything contrary to the leftist beliefs represents sin. More importantly, leftism is a totalitarian force because of the leftist drive for power. The leftist seeks to satisfy his need for power through identification with a social movement, and he tries to go through the power process by helping to pursue and attain the goals of the movement. But no matter how far the movement has gone in attaining its goals, the leftist is never satisfied because its activism is a surrogate activity. That is, the leftist's real motive is not to attain the ostensible goals of leftism. In reality, he is motivated by the sense of power he gets from struggling for and then reaching a social goal. Consequently, the leftist is never satisfied with the goals he has already attained. His need for the power process leads him to always pursue some new goal. The leftist wants equal opportunities for minorities. When that is attained, he insists on statistical equality of achievement by minorities. And as long as anyone harbors in some corner of his mind a negative attitude towards some minority, the leftist has to re-educate him. Well, anybody have a guess who said that? Karl Marx? George Soros? No, it was the Unabomber, Ted Kaczynski, who died in prison, maybe by suicide, within the last, week or 10 days. Very interesting observation. In fact, I agree with everything that he said. I don't agree with what he did or how he ended up. He murdered people. He killed people. He was a bad, evil person. But, even bad, evil people sometimes get it right. And he was right. So here's an interesting thing. This is France is in really a state of meltdown. Minorities, you're not allowed to call them by their ethnic or religious character, but it's pretty clear who is doing this. This has been a problem in France for many years, the burning of vehicles and that sort of thing. I have friends who've lived in France, and they said, if you call the police and you describe for them who burned the vehicle, they leave. They don't take a report or anything. And so each year, hundreds, thousands of vehicles are burned. And now it's boiled over because the police killed someone who they were taking into custody, who I saw a video of a week or so before he was killed, a 17-year-old, and he was, well, you can find the video on the internet. Here's a little report from NBC about what's going on in France.
Tonight, more violence in France on the 5th day of rioting. A grenade exploding in Marseille. And more arrests, dampening hopes that the worst may be over. This after more than 1,300 people were arrested last night alone, with 45,000 police officers on the streets. Hundreds of them have been injured so far, authorities say. Amid the chaos, looting overnight, hundreds of cars set on fire. And the State Department urging Americans to stay away from the protests for their safety. The unrest coming in response to Tuesday's killing by police of a 17-year-old boy identified as Niall M. of North African descent. He was shot during a traffic stop after police say he tried to drive away and officers feared for their safety. But prosecutors charging the officer preliminarily with voluntary homicide, saying the conditions to discharge a weapon hadn't been met. The killing lighting a match under long-simmering complaints about racism and discrimination by French law enforcement, an allegation the government denies. President Emmanuel Macron calling the rioting absolutely unacceptable and unjustifiable. Tonight, Macron canceling a planned state visit to Germany, pleading for calm and for parents to keep their teenagers at home.
Niles, relatives, and members of the French Muslim community packed a mosque this afternoon in the Paris suburb of Nanterre for a private funeral, with a spillover crowd of hundreds more praying on the street outside. Kate?
Okay.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel.
Could somebody turn this fan on for me, please? It's interesting. He just recently gave a speech. Macron has been traveling around the Middle East trying to make friends and do French diplomacy. And he said, tackle poverty and climate at the same time, he urged. And now his country is melting down. And he had, thank you. And he, it's already spilling over into Belgium. There were also some street protests involving non-British flags in London today. London has a very heavy presence of a certain religion. It's sort of shocking. When we were there 4 years ago, we stayed in a hotel not too far from Marble Arch where Speaker's Corner is, the great place where there's freedom of speech. And our hotel in that part of London had 50 channels. 10 of them were Arabic language. Now, that doesn't happen unless there's a significant Arabic-speaking population. And it was true. It was sort of like being part of the Middle East. In fact, I think there were more Arabic channels there than I saw in Israel. So now we have this decision that came out, and there's a few Supreme Court decisions, and I think they were important. So one was affirmative action in college admissions. So here's what the Wall Street Journal editorial had to say about this. Jackson is free to make the case that our history has robbed Black Americans of their agency, and so the 14th Amendment should be rewritten. She is free to believe that Asian Americans and whites, and perhaps others, do not deserve equal protection under the law. But those arguments, I think this is what with Justice Thomas said in his dissent, or his opinion, but those arguments belong in the editorial pages of The Atlantic or the New York Times, not in the Supreme Court. And I can't remember, I think this was an editorial writer at the Wall Street Journal who said that, but Chief Justice Roberts came out and sort of raked the justices over the coals for getting a little bit too personal in the way they express themselves in their opinions. Now, he tried to make it balanced, but I can tell you that Justice Jackson was unhinged. And I have to admit there was a certain guilty pleasure that I had as these opinions came down on Thursday and Friday, flipping over to MSNBC and watching the hand-wringing meltdown, angst, and all sorts of things that had been triggered in all of those people. So I'll confess to that. So that was on Thursday, was the affirmative action case. And then the question becomes, what impact is this going to have on corporations who do this diversity, equity, and inclusion? Now, the statement was the case is strictly limited to the college admissions. But I think there's a much broader principle that's going to be taken from this opinion, because you can't show what's going on in diversity, equity, inclusion and its evil twin, ESG, environmental, social, and governance, that's permeating the corporate world. I talked to someone that has been involved in banking for over 50 years. I trust him for his opinion on what's going on in the banking world. He seems to be pretty knowledgeable from what I've seen, what I've experienced over decades of knowing this person and talking to him about economy and particularly banking. And he said that the large banks in the country are starting to hemorrhage customers because what they're doing is they're applying what he described as they're looking at your footprint, meaning your carbon footprint, and they're deciding how much you should be allowed to borrow based on your carbon footprint and what you're going to do with the money. So a lot of people, which I think is a great news, are saying, I'm done with the big banks. They're leaving the big banks like JP Morgan and Bank of America, Wells Fargo, because they don't want to put up with this diversity, equity, inclusion, and ESG nonsense because it makes no economic sense. Right now, do you know that in Texas, they are within tenths of a percentage point of running out of electricity to operate the grid in a heat wave? Now, The Guardian or one of the big newspapers in England came out and said, well, it's great that Texas has added all this solar power, and they've doubled the amount of power that they had, solar power that they had a couple years ago. But what's the problem with solar power? It operates about 6.4 hours per day maximum. Now, that probably wouldn't be true in Ohio, particularly when we have smoke from Canadian fires blowing down our way. It would affect how well the solar panels would perform, but they only operate 6.4 hours per day. But when's the peak demand in Texas? About 6 p.m. at night, which is right around the time that solar power stops working very efficiently. So what do? You have to have a continuous supply of electricity to meet the demand. If you don't meet demand, everything starts to unwind. And it's hilarious to watch Congress people and talking to these energy people about how much electricity is going to be used. I think there was one this week. I don't know if it was I think it was the energy secretary. How much electricity is going to be used to recharge electric cars? And the guy acted like, well, you just plug it in and it recharges. What's the problem? I saw a picture, by the way, of one in a remote area of Canada or someplace, a electric vehicle charging station. And Pam and I, when we went across Canada, even out in the wilds of Ontario, we would, pull into a little town to get some gas, and there'd be, 3 or 4 fast charge electric stations there for usually Tesla. Now, somebody looked, and somebody ought to do this as a project if you're out traveling around this summer, and you're not sitting in a long line to try to get into, say, Yosemite, where I hear it's taking 5 hours to get into the park because everybody's going. But, and hopefully you didn't go there with an electric car and you're sitting in that line trying to run your air conditioning for 5 hours. But they had a picture of an electric charging station, and then in the back of the lot was a giant Generac diesel electric generator. And I forget who it was, a friend of mine, I think he lives in Manitoba, Carl Techribe, posted on his Facebook page that he was out driving. He might have been driving in Saskatchewan, and he saw a couple. And in Saskatchewan, the saying in Canada is Saskatchewan is so flat that if your kid or dog runs away, you can watch them leave for 4 days. But he saw someone there, and they actually had a generator in their trunk recharging their electric vehicle out in the middle of nowhere, which is not hard to find in Saskatchewan. So the point of all this is that there's a certain amount of insanity in our world today as people try to put these things in, and they do it because they feel good and they feel like they're doing this social good, but it doesn't work. So I love John Kennedy, the senator from Louisiana, when he questions people from the administration during Senate hearings. And he just, I'm not trying to be mean or nothing. I know you're a good person and you love your family, but you got kind of insane ideas, And he just does it with that sort of downspun Southern humor way that he has of delivering it. So great decision on affirmative action. Then there were another one, the court struck down the student loan relief program. And then the justices came out in a case involving a web designer in Colorado, came out and said that if you don't have to create they can't force you to make something if it sends a message that you disagree with. So that Jack Phillips, who we met a couple years ago in Colorado, this is a good decision for him. This should get him off of the hook, particularly since it involves the same Colorado laws that they keep coming after him on. I think those cases are at least going to go away. And it was enjoyable to watch President Biden have meltdowns over these things. They can't do that. They took away my student loan. Well, and the question would be, are they going to follow the law now that the Supreme Court, because they love the Supreme Court when it gives an opinion that agrees with them. But now it's like, and you're going to see a push for packing the court. You're going to see there's an organization called ProPublica that's been attacking Justices Alito and Thomas over trips that might have been funded by someone, which everybody else has taken on the other side, but they don't look at those. And so they're going to try to get them, they should recuse themselves. Well, when should they recuse themselves? Well, in every case in which they're going to rule against us. That's an easy test. So here's a little chart from the New York Times. Whoops. So you can kind of see here, major decisions by the court, a lot of them the student loans was 6-3, affirmative action was 6-3, religion, free speech, and gay rights was 6-3. And you'll see the opinions now, the headlines everywhere, people now not allowed to serve gays. And that's not what the decision said. The decision was pretty limited in its scope, but you can't force somebody to say something that they disagree with. And you'll see, like, MSNBC was like, oh, well, the guy that was involved in the case, he doesn't even remember being involved, and it was a fake case, on and on. There was a bad decision on state legislatures and federal elections, I thought. That's in race and voting maps. Those were not very good decisions, and hopefully those will get done. What the other ones were. Oh, religious employees, that was another one that was a 9-0 decision. So that was pretty good. So we've got a lot of things going on. The economy is really hanging by a thread. Commercial real estate is in a very difficult session. So you can see that the downstrokes here are not what you want to see. And we're on a very bad downtrend. We're below that red line where it seems like a recession is looming. And the left still continues to do crazy things. This is our friends up north in Michigan. This is yet another reason to rule against the school to root against the school up north because their state supports idiocy. Michigan residents, this is from the Daily Mail in the UK. By the way, I find the UK papers to be better edited. They have a left or center left orientation, but they seem to cover the news better than American newspapers. Michigan residents could be charged with a felony, face up to 5 years in prison, and get a $10,000 fine for using the wrong pronouns under what one law professor says is a clearly unconstitutional new bill. They talk about if you intimidate a person, which means a willful course of conduct involving repeated or continuing harassment of another person that would cause a reasonable individual to feel terrorized, frightened, or threatened, and that actually causes the victim to feel terrorized. Intimidate does not mean a constitutionally protected activity or conduct that serves a legitimate purpose. So if you're trying to protect and they're coupling these with anti-conversion laws, which is, the whole thing is insane. You cannot try to stop a child. It's a felony. You're not trying to stop a child from changing, pretending that they're going to be another sex by mutilating their body or doing puberty blockers. You can't. You just can't do that. That's it's anti-conversion law. You're not allowed to do that. But you can convert the child. You can mutilate them, and that's okay. Nobody can say anything about it. It's insanity. And I think what the Unabomber said in that opening quote that I gave from his writings was exactly right. They have to keep moving on, and so now we've reached the edge where they've gone over the edge of insanity. The other thing that we're going to see a lot is information disinformation. This is an interview. It's only about a minute. Okay, so this is former President Obama speaking with his former Chief of Staff, David Axelrod, on the Axe Files about a week or so ago, talking about information disinformation that might come up in the next campaign.
That technology is here now. So most immediately, we're going to have all the problems we had with misinformation before. This next election cycle will be worse. And the need for us, for the general public, I think, to be more discriminating consumers of news and information. The need for us to, over time, develop technologies to create watermarks or digital fingerprints so we know what is true and what is not true. There's a whole bunch of work that's going to have to be done there. But in the short term, it's really going to be up to the American people to kind of say...
Which is tough given the environment we discussed earlier, where so much is being pushed at you in your silo, and so you're predisposed to believe...
Whatever pops up.
Whatever pops up.
Obviously, we saw that during the vaccination stuff.
So back to the economy. This is, my slides got a little out of order. Wall Street sours on America's downtowns, particularly in the Midwest. I've been told, talking to some bankers and that type of thing, that we saw what's happened in San Francisco. Some office buildings in downtown San Francisco are 97% empty. Others that were valued in the $800 million range just a few years ago now might sell for $40 or $50 million. 2,000-room hotels, the owner of the hotels has turned the keys over to the lender. Westfield Malls, which owns the San Francisco Center, turned the keys to the mall, beautiful mall, and on Market Street or around Market Street in downtown San Francisco, just turned the keys over to the lender. We're giving up on the mall. Nordstrom's is withdrawing, and the mall is somewhere around 50 or 55% empty. I don't go to malls anymore. I hear through the grapevine that there are major problems with like Tuttle over around Dublin and Polaris malls. I don't know. I'm just saying this is what I hear. I look around, I see a lot of empty office buildings. I see empty parking lots in the middle of the day that never happened before. This is true all over the Midwest. Now, Columbus is a little bit different. It seems like we're sort of in a little bit of a protective bubble here. The economy is pretty good. People are moving their businesses to town. But when I look at a place like San Francisco, I can say, I think that San Francisco is under God's judgment. I mean, there's just no question about it. Here's and you look at different places over the past few years, from the pandemic till now, occupancy by these metro areas as a percentage of pre-pandemic occupancy, and you can see that in some places that it's been really bad. It's recovered a little bit, but there's no city that has 60% of what it was before the pandemic. That's not sustainable. All of those buildings have loans. All of those loans have to be repaid. All of those loans are held by banks. And my understanding is they're trying to keep them out of foreclosure, which I understand, because when all of those hit the market, foreclosure sales on a lot of properties, and that's what I used to do almost full time for many years, particularly after the 2008 mortgage crisis and home crisis that affected commercial real estate then as well. when all those properties are hitting the market, values go way down. I remember I foreclosed on a golf course that I'd played many times over in Indiana. It had sold for $7.5 million in 2007. And I think this was about 2014. It sold at foreclosure auction, and we got $1,505,000. Somebody took a big bath on that, particularly the person who had paid that amount for the property. Here's another interesting cell phone activity as a percentage of pre-COVID levels. Look at San Francisco, almost about just a little bit above 25% of what it was before the pandemic. Cell phone activity. New York is not even up at 75%. And I saw articles about this week that New York's in big trouble as well. So let me. Okay, so let's talk about the Middle East, and this is going to be kind of jumbled because the news is flying all over the place, and I'll just try to make sense of it. This is from the Jewish Chronicle a week ago. It's published in the UK. British swarming drone research shared with Iran. So I've talked about this, is that, you know, this phrase in Ezekiel 38 about it come up like a cloud against land. Does that mean a drone swarm? Now we see that the UK has been actually sharing research and technology about that with Iran, of all people. And it's clear that even the Jewish Chronicle says this has clear implications. Now here's another report again. Somehow these got all messed up. Castrating young men so they can't have kids, it's genocide. I shared this when I was in the UK. This was what's been happening in Ukraine by Russian soldiers, of Ukrainian men, soldiers. This is a brutal, look, I know it's war, and there's probably atrocities on both sides, but this is what's being reported, and I've not seen this refuted. You need to understand that the Wagner group is brutal. And there are Ukrainian soldiers that are brutal too, but this is a particular one. And I was sharing this, and a lady in the front row was just sobbing. And she came up to me later and said that her son from the UK, he was military, had spent time in Russia. He had gone to Ukraine to volunteer, and he was captured and killed by the Russians. So I had no idea. And she said, you know, you don't need to apologize for this, but this is a brutal war that's going on, and it's going to have implications. In fact, let me jump ahead here, because I have a lot of things on this Ukraine war that I want to talk about, which I'm sure is going to trigger everybody under the sun. Before that, let me just say one thing. This is something you also need to be aware of. U.S. drought threatens to prop up food inflation. Seemed like everything was getting better, but the Ukrainian food deal, or the Ukrainian grain deal, where Russia was allowed Ukrainian grain to leave Russia and go out into the world markets, comes to an end in about 10 days. Russia has indicated it will not be renewed. That's going to take a lot of grain out of the market. There's been droughts and other problems all over the world. I mean, I think there's even droughts down in Brazil, Argentina. Here in the U.S., it's been dry around here. It's going to affect crops. Now, we don't see that right now because what's being processed for our food now is in the system, but it's going to have an impact in the future. Supply and demand, less supply, demand stays the same, food prices will go up. Have you noticed that they've gone up a little bit so far? You know, you go someplace where the whole family used to eat for $8, and now it's like $13 per person or something like that. It's clearly happening. So that's going to happen. So let's talk about the Ukrainian. Well, this is true also in Iran. They're going to have food insecurity as well. There in the midst, this is a map showing the precipitation by Iranian province. The lighter the color, the less rain. And you can see a lot of Iran is in major drought. Increasing food insecurity, this is from the Institute for the Study of War. Increasing food insecurity and internal displacement will likely increase popular unrest in the coming years, threatening the stability of the Iranian regime. The drying up of wetlands and rivers will limit Iranians' access to clean drinking water and decrease food production, which will in turn harm many Iranians' livelihoods. Esfahan province residents previously protested the drying up of the river in November 2021. Increased internal migration will additionally place an immense burden on large cities such as Tehran and change Iran's social landscape. I only point this out is that we know that there's this coming war that we read about in Ezekiel 38 and 39. And the question is, what triggers this? And the answer is, it might be a lot of things that trigger it. It talks about putting hooks in the jaws of this Magog to drag them in. But we don't know what, and it's not a hook, it's hooks. So it's probably a couple things. And so I will turn you around and bring you back. So it's like they were kind of there and then they left and now they're being drugged back in. So we just need to be open for how is that going to work out and what does all of that mean? And it may be, look, why is Persia coming into this? They have all the oil they need. Well, because they hate Israel. They have that hypersonic missile, and they did when they were putting that hypersonic missile out. I think this is where AI may help. So here's the announcement of the hypersonic missile in Tehran a few weeks ago. And it says we're going to hit the hypersonic missile. When they talked about it first last fall, they said 400 seconds to Jerusalem. Which if you divide that into minutes, it's 6.6666 minutes. I'm sure that's just a coincidence. I don't think they know that. But here's this pop-up Dome of the Rock that they put at the announcement in Tehran. And so my hope is, okay, how do we get rid of that thing to build the temple? How's that going to happen? Now, maybe next door, we don't know. But maybe AI is going to take the data and everything from a picture like this and say, oh, well, that's a target for the hypersonic missile. And so we'll just tell AI to develop targets. It'll look at that picture and say, oh, there's one. We'll take out that thing. End time problem solved. I don't know that that's true. Okay, so now I promised I would get to Russia in just a minute. So let me go here to, this is an incredibly complex thing that's happened. So until a week ago, Russia denied that its government had any responsibility for the Wagner Group. Wagner denied it. Russia denied it. Now, there was a video, Shadow Men, that was put up. You can get that on YouTube from the Wall Street Journal, that talked about the development of the Wagner Group. And last year, when Prigozhin, this guy, the head of Wagner, was recruiting soldiers in Russian prisons, he said, we have the support of Russia. Russia continued to deny that. Now, Russia did that because what's happened to Russia over the last year and a half, they've been sanctioned by everybody under the sun for doing wrong things. But then there was a speech at the Kremlin, and Putin came out in the Kremlin. This is after the, I don't know if I would call it a rebellion or revolution. I would call it a mutiny, where Prigozhin came against his friend. They had both grown up, by the way, in St. Petersburg, in some pretty bad neighborhoods, and St. Petersburg had a pretty high incident. But one of the things, Prigozhin did not like Shoigu, and he wanted to get rid of Shoigu because he didn't think Shoigu was supporting his people. But you see, here's Putin delivering this speech after the mutiny had finished. He allowed Prigozhin to go to Belarus into exile. And he also said that the Wagner Group soldiers could now be brought into the Russian army. But he admitted, I think it was in this speech, that Wagner Group had been supported by Russia to the tune of about $1.2 billion per year. Now, the way the Wagner Group happened, and Prigozhin was upset. He had come out, this is back in March, where he said that, where's the ammunition for my guys? Because he had to go through Shoigu to get the ammunition supplies. And so he was upset because he had, Ukraine came out this week and said that 21,000 Wagner troops have been killed in Ukraine. I don't know if that's true. I think that number is probably close to accurate. Ukrainians have lost a lot of people. I don't think Ukraine's going to win this thing. The question is, what kind of peace agreement will they be able to get? Unless the West sends all kinds of troops in there. Because Russia has a 3-to-1 manpower advantage, even though Russia's kind of limited by demographics and that sort of thing. Ukraine's limited by demographics. So if Ukraine goes into a battle and they kill 3,000 Russians, but 3,000 Ukrainians die, the Ukrainians have lost that battle, even though they've gained some ground back. They have to kill about 3 times as many Russians as they have killed themselves. And I just don't see that happening. So the practical, without judging which side's right and wrong and all of that, it's going to be very difficult in a war of attrition for Ukraine to hang in there all the way, even with weapons coming from the West. It just doesn't appear to be enough. CSIS, the Center for Security and International Strategy and International Security, has done, you can go to CSIS, they do a lot of their think tank, and I don't agree with their orientation, but the one guy came out this week and he said, get over the fantasy that Russia's running out of missiles or ammunition. They've got tons of it, and they're making agreements with Iran to bring in even more than the West seems to be giving to Ukraine. So that's an issue. And then the Wagner Group, again, they always claim that it was independent, but the Wagner Group has continued. I heard that they were recruiting in Russian cities this week, even though they're supposedly over. I don't think they're going to get any more support from Russia, but they didn't get all of their support from Russia. Prigozhin was, I think he spent 10 years in prison. He came out, he got a catering business. He was referred to as Putin's chef, and he had a friendship with Putin, and he was able to work that into this arrangement where he had this private military group. And Russia has a number of private military groups, but Wagner is the biggest. And so the question is, what's going to happen in these areas? So the dark red areas are, and then depending on how red the area is, those are areas where the Wagner Group is operating. And you can see, for example, in the Mediterranean, my laser pointer here. Here in the Mediterranean, that's Syria. The Wagner Group is really the Russian presence on the ground in Syria. So now the Wagner Group is over, but what happens to the soldiers that are there? Who's going to support them? And are they going to be loyal to Russia? Or are they going to be loyal to Prigozhin, who's now in exile in Belarus? That's an important question. same way. And so, again, this is the area where Ezekiel 38 and 39 is going to happen here in Israel, northern Israel. And one of it says is Libya and Sudan are going to come along. The Russian presence in Libya and Sudan is pretty much done through Wagner. In the Central African Republic, which 20 years ago, most evangelical missions and analysts said the Central African Republic was the most heavily evangelized country on planet Earth. And then everything fell apart. Now, I don't know the exact status of the believers there. I used to have a lot of friends who were missionaries there, but there was, I think, some corruption, morality problems within the church there. And Muslims and others have overrun the country. They've come down from Chad. And it was a problem 20 years ago. It's a bigger problem now. But the Wagner Group has come in, and they make a deal with the leader of the Central African Republic, which is always a dictator. Remember the guy named Bokassa? He was crowned himself emperor. And he used up a lot of the wealth of the country of Central Africa, a very poor country, to have that ceremony where he was crowned emperor. I had friends, they were almost like grandparents to me, that had been missionaries there for many years. They used to live next door to the guy when he was a sergeant in the army. And they said he was crazy, and he turned out to be crazy, and he plundered the country. And so the Wagner, you even see him in over here in Venezuela. But those are all up in the air right now. So Russia has always projected power through the Wagner Group. And the question is, what does it mean? So Russia's doing things like they're taking down recruitment signs in Russia for the Wagner Group. This is a picture, there's a big office building in St. Petersburg where Putin and Prigozhin grew up, and big fancy office building. The question is, what's going to happen to that now? So what Russia's been doing is they've been scrambling over the past week or so, like they're sitting in, here's a deputy foreign minister of Russia ran down to Damascus to meet with Assad because Russia has been propping up the Assad regime and helping Iran. So now the question is, what happens if Wagner's not very involved in Syria during this transition period? Will Iran take advantage of that to put more people in place? And I'll talk about that in just a moment. So it's a big problem for Putin right now. So I think that Putin looks a bit weak. I don't know if he's going anywhere. He comes from a small group, 100 or so people that are in the ruling elite of Russia, have been since its collapse and the takeover from Yeltsin about 25 years ago. I don't know exactly what's going to happen. I don't think he's going away, but I don't think he looks particularly strong. But I wouldn't jump to the conclusion that it's all over for Russia and Ukraine right now. I just don't think so. It's all very much up in the air. And the question is, can Ukraine in the war take advantage of it? But Russia's scrambling. They're calling the leader of Central Africa, they're calling the leaders of Sudan and Libya, at least the people they're supporting, and saying, hey, we're okay, we're going to come in there, everything's going to be okay. Because, for example, in Central Africa, how Wagner funded itself, in addition to the money that it got from Russia, and the contracts that Prigozhin had to supply food to the Russian army, military, which he made a profit off of, was that they go into like Central Africa and they say, okay, we'll help you out, we'll help keep you in place as the leader. We have very good soldiers. 1,000 of our guys will take care of a lot of, the untrained militias that might be attacking you, but we get a big cut of your diamond mining business or your gold mining business or your oil. That's what they've done in Libya, Sudan, the oil, that type of thing, and diamond mining and gold mining in Central African Republic. So Prigozhin's probably a billionaire on paper. But now that Russia has come out and said, well, they're really part of us, now everybody can sanction the Wagner Group everywhere, just like they've sanctioned Russia. Now, it hasn't been entirely effective. Russia's found workarounds and that sort of thing. So we sanction Iran, we sanction Russia, so okay, we'll just deal with each other. We'll sanction, and China says, well, I need oil, we need oil, so we'll buy your oil, Russia and Iran. We don't care. Now you have this meeting coming up in August 22nd where the BRICS are going to try to put in place what appears to be a gold-backed currency to try to drive the dollar out. It might work, I don't know. For example, the Russian currency is only about 2% of the dollar reserve currency value in the world. So I don't know if there's a big hurdle to overcome. And it could happen, it might not happen. I'm just saying it is August 22nd seems to be a pretty big deal. The other thing that happened was that Prigozhin went to Belarus. That would be up, let's say, a little bit further out view here. Here we go. So he went up to Belarus. Now, around July 1st, tactical nuclear weapons were supposed to be transferred to Belarus. And there was some indication from some of the military bloggers that the Belarusian president, Lukashenko, had said that these nukes were going to be under the control of a private army. Now, what did that mean? And do we really want the Wagner Group, who are brutal? By the way, everybody, boy, it would have been great if Putin was taken out of office. Well, it depends what replaces him. If Prigozhin replaces Putin, that's really bad for the world. Because Prigozhin doesn't have any scruples. I think Putin has some scruples, maybe not many, and some of which we don't like at all. So he's in Belarus, and by the way, in Lithuania, right up here, in Vilnius, actually, I'm not sure how you say that, it begins with a V, it is having a NATO summit in 10 days. And here's the NATO page on that. Vilnius, Lithuania. I actually think this was where if I recall from a visit to the Holocaust Museum, there was a pretty bad attack on Jews in Vilnius, Lithuania, back in the late 1930s or 1941 or so. Horrible, very interesting stories, but not time. I've talked about that before. So here's the situation in Ukraine. So Russia and Ukraine are sort of fighting along. This area seems to be under the control of Russia, Ukraine, and then over here in this region, Ukraine keeps making little incursions. They say there's a counteroffensive, but they don't seem to be very effective right now. I think military people in the West say whatever they're doing is not being that effective. And Russia's just this Donetsk and Luhansk regions over here, the Donbass, they've really dug in. And they've got multiple lines of trenches and that type of thing. So the Russians retreat a little bit, Ukrainians run in, and the Russians have the exact coordinates to send their artillery in and just turn it into a meat grinder of Ukrainians. So Ukraine's trying to do a few things. There's been a few things that have happened. If you remember, about a week or so ago, there was this dam that failed. And so this is where the trolls, people say, oh, you don't understand what you're talking about. As I've sort of looked at it and analyzed it over the last few weeks, I think it benefits Russia more to have the dam gone than the Ukrainians benefit from having the dam gone, because it makes Ukrainian movement on an offense very difficult. It also affects maybe up to 25% of Ukrainian farmland, which hurts them economically. So this dam right here, and then there's also a little bit to the west of it, there's a bridge. So here's some pictures. This is from the Center for Strategic and International Studies. That's CSIS. By the way, if you remember a number of years ago, I talked about CSIS, a guy named Cordesman, you can look it up. His name is Cordesman, Anthony Cordesman. He did this great survey. This is 2007 or 2008, so like 15 years ago, 16 years ago, of what would happen if there was a nuclear exchange between Israel and Iran, or Syria and Israel. And his conclusion, by the way, was Syria and Iran will cease to exist. Israel would have a lot of casualties, but would recover. And that's kind of interesting when you look at it from the Bible prophecy standpoint. So that was back in 2007. So this is the Kakhovka Dam, and it breached. So this is what it looked like on June 4th, and then there was an explosion that took place, and this is what happened. So you go downriver from that, and this is what it looked like on June 5th, and then by the next day it looked like this. So there was a lot of damage. And when you look at what happened, for example, there's some crossings that if Ukraine is going to go into this region, this would be moving south, there were areas that they could cross the river. So it was about 583 meters, roughly a quarter of a mile or so, across there. Over here, it was about a little over half a mile. Well, now what's happened with the dam broke, this is why I think it's more likely, the dam's under the control of Russia. And the dam to be destroyed is going to have explosives planted way down in the dam that I think only Russia would have access to at this time. But I could be wrong, I'm not wedded to it. But now look at the crossing that it would take Ukraine to do, 3,660 meters. So that's like, what, 2 miles? Times 3. And this one also increases to a couple of miles. So it really hinders Ukraine. The other thing that's happened is that there's this bridge to the west of the dam that Ukraine also took, that appears that Ukraine took this out. Now that bridge can be repaired, but here's the problem. Who's going to repair it? And it's hard to repair this. You know, it's hard to make these crossings when you have artillery shooting at you and that type of thing. You're kind of a sitting duck out there. As I always say, the flattest thing in the world is still water, because you can see for a long way on the water. So who's going to repair this? Russia could repair this, maybe. Remember back last October, there was this attack on the Kerch Straits Bridge that goes from Russia. It's a land connection from Russia to Crimea. And then they can come up through Crimea, but the bridge was attacked. Ukraine has taken credit for it. And it was an amazing attack when you think about it. They blew up the lane that's furthest away. There's 2 lanes, and then the space, then 2 lanes going the other direction, and then a rail bridge with rails that go in both directions. They blew up the 2 lanes farthest away from the rail bridge, but when they did that, it was done at the exact moment that there was a train going by, I think going the same direction as the truck that blew up, and it blew up right where there was a group of cars full of diesel oil. I mean, the timing was either a miracle or it was incredibly well planned and executed. I think it was well planned and executed. And it burned that bridge. They were able to repair the deck of what that blew up, but the rail bridge was warped. The metal was heated to a sufficient degree that it was weakened and it warped. They did put some trains across there, but they eventually had to remove the span. So that attack happened in October. We're in early July now, and that bridge span has not yet been replaced. So what that means is that Russia really can't get, now they can load things on ferries to go across the Kerch Strait, and they've done this. They've loaded rail cars, trucks, all this thing, but it's a logistical nightmare. And then when they do get there, they have 2 ways then to get up into Ukraine. because the region right here, this area here, there's a land bridge here, but that is like I'm sort of thinking southern Georgia, northern Florida. It's just like brackish lakes and swamps, and you just don't drive trucks across it. That's the point. And then there is a land bridge over here. But if the Russian troops need to be supplied here, you're going to have to bring stuff here, load it on ferries, go all the way here across, and bring it up in here. So effectively, the troops in this region are at risk of being cut off, particularly if Ukraine can come down in here. And I don't know that they can do, but they could come down here, they could have come down across the Dnipro River here, but now it's a couple miles wide instead of a quarter mile wide, which is a logistical problem. And then all this water in this reservoir, all the way up here, is draining down. By the way, this is Rostov, where Prigozhin took over some Russian buildings. It appears he even had some Russian commanders that helped him. There's been a guy they call the Russians General Armageddon who's been arrested because of his participation in this. So it's a big mess. And so the question is, well, what happens with, if Russia is Magog, and how does this affect Ezekiel 38 and 39? And my point is, what they had here in Syria was 5,000 or so, maybe 5,000 Wagner people. Now the question is, are they under control of Russia or not? Remember, the U.S. in northeast Syria took out a couple hundred Wagner guys when they had a little bit of a dust-up a couple years ago. But, so here's Ukraine. So if Russia's going to attack, they got to come all the way down here. These are 18 to 20,000 foot high mountains in the Caucasus regions. They have to come all the way here. And so from like right in here, near the Crimean Peninsula, down to Russia is like 1,000 miles. So if they're having trouble with supply lines next door, add 1,000 miles and 18 to 20,000 foot mountains in between, and you understand there's a logistics issue. I know everybody says, well, just put it on a plane. Well, you need big airstrips and that type of thing. So I'm just saying I don't think that Ezekiel 38, 39 is imminent. I think it's more near the end towards when the Lord returns anyway. That's just my opinion. And so the other thing that's going on is that Russia continues to enter into agreements with Iran, and there's plenty of Iranian things about this. And so this is a good article in the Jerusalem Post the other day, countering Iranian warfare in Judea and Samaria. Because Iranians never miss an opportunity to do something bad. So what they're trying to do is they feel that their strategy for undermining Syria, taking over Syria as a way to get closer to Israel, has been very effective. They've supported Hezbollah, they've supported militias there, and Russia has joined up with Iran. But this is causing Russia internal problems. 25% of Russia and cities like Moscow are now Sunni Muslim. What has happened in Syria? They've destroyed Iran, Shiite, Hezbollah, Shiite, Russia supporting the Alawite, which is a Alawite religion, branch of Islam, which is sort of Shiite. That's why Syria and Iran can kind of get along. The Sunnis are really upset with Russia. And I've talked about this, some of you will remember, I've talked about this for 25 years. That one of the hooks might be Russia thinking, okay, we don't want to have a Sunni Islam problem in Russia. What could we do to get these people on our side? Hey, we'll help you invade Israel and get rid of your Israel problem. So what Iran is doing now is they're seeing that their strategy in Syria seems to be effective. Israel continues to attack. But now the question is Russia going to continue to allow Israel to attack in Syria? some of the air defense things that might have stopped Israel from attacking Syria have been removed to Ukraine because Russia needs them up there. So what I'm trying to say is it's all very much in turmoil up in the air right now. Very crazy situation. And so what Iran is doing, what Iran is now doing in Judea and Samaria, also called the West Bank, is they're starting to apply their Syrian strategy. They're arming Palestinian Islamic Jihad, Hamas. They're providing them with weapons. They're smuggling them over from Jordan, even across the Allenby Bridge. There was a Jordanian member of parliament who was arrested a couple weeks ago, bringing weapons over from Jordan into the West Bank, Judea and Samaria. And the Israeli foreign minister called up the Jordanian foreign minister to complain about that, and then the Jordanian foreign minister wouldn't take the call. So there's a tremendous amount of tension, and there's a lot of things going on in the Middle East with IEDs in Israel, with IEDs and that type of thing. And the situation is, I think, very volatile. David Weinberg, who's associated with the IDSF, General Miravivi's group, said that the problem with the U.S. now, they come in and say, well, if I use the term Palestinian. By the way, Palestinian didn't really exist until the Russians created it back in the 60s with a guy named Yasser Arafat, who was an Egyptian Arab. But they made up this group called the Palestinians about 1964. That was KGB operation, and Putin is KGB, now FSB. That's where they came from, big propaganda arm. And what the United States has been doing is we have our people running around saying, well, Israel, somebody is attacked in Israel by Palestinians and killed. Israel responds with a military strike in Jenin or Nablus or someplace like that, and immediately our State Department says, we decry violence on both sides. Well, it's not morally equivalent, and we need to stop this nonsense. Very volatile situation. So I'm going to take about, let's see. So a year ago, there was a article that appeared. So the UN comes out and says, now Israel's saying we're going to build new settlements. And immediately UN comes in and says, settlement activity fuels West Bank violence. And, this is an article from a couple weeks ago. Foggy Bottom, that's the State Department, courts Palestinians as Ramallah insults Washington. And then it says here, this is an article from the New York Times a couple weeks ago, Saudi Arabia and Israel are reinventing themselves. Big article on the editorial pages of the New York Times. So at the Aspen Ideas Festival, I'm just going to play a clip of this. This is the Saudi ambassador to the U.S. She's the first female ambassador. Her father was the ambassador to the U.S. for about 23 years. And she's talking about, we need to work with people. We need to do this. Here's the second part of her interview with Andrea Mitchell. This was I think a week ago at the Aspen Ideas Festival put on in Aspen, Colorado by the Aspen Institute.
Can you see China also trying to negotiate between the kingdom and Israel?
The kingdom has a policy, which is we believe in a two-state solution. We want to see a thriving Israel. We want to see a thriving Palestine. Vision 2030 talks about a unified, integrated, thriving Middle East. And last I checked, Israel was there. We want a thriving Red Sea economy. We want our African partners and neighbors to thrive. That is the ultimate goal. But the resolution has to come with equitable peace and dignity of living for both parties. I don't think there's any Israeli mother that wakes up every morning celebrating rockets coming over. I don't think there's one Palestinian mother that celebrates her son or daughter losing their life for this conflict. It's been too long. And I'll tell you, my father was our ambassador for 23 years to the United States. I mourned those 23 years. Those were 23 years he lived on an airplane, and many of you who've known him in this room know he dedicated his life to solving this situation. So nothing would give me more pleasure than to be Saudi Arabia.
So you can do this. So this is an incredibly volatile time. The other thing that I've mentioned a number of times is sort of what I consider to be the demographic issue. Here's China's demographics. So lower, children at the bottom, old people at the top. This is what China's population pyramid looked like in 1970. Because everybody wanted China's like this big, powerful country and nothing will change. And the answer is, yeah, it will change. Look at this. So that's 1970. Look at how many children they were having. And now this is around the time they instituted the one-child policy. By 1980, that's what their population period looked at. The kids started to disappear. You go out to 2030, look at that population pyramid. They're not having children. And on the right is their population growth. It peaks around 2020, and then it declines pretty precipitously. And it's probably going to be quicker. Here is from Zion on Geopolitics, Peter Zion. This is a recent chart. This is from 2025. This is what it is based on current data. The children are not there. It's a big problem. China is going to go into decline. So everybody who's been putting their labor costs are going up faster than any other country on the planet. So all these companies like Apple and that type of thing who've built all these big plants and that type of thing in China, their costs are going to go up. And they're in the process of going up, and that's a big problem. Back in 2018, the Washington Post had a great article called Too Many Men. And what they looked at was China and India. So you can see the differences here on this side. Let me see if I can zoom in here. So here's China and India, and you can see that the number, girls and boys, they had, in 2018, they had 63 million boys, 57 million girls. That means there's 6 million boys who don't have the prospect of a wife. Now, I think I can say boys are probably a little bit more prone to violence than girls. And that's a big problem. Look, as you project this out, though, this is a projection of the comparison of how many male babies born for every 100 female babies because of abortion and favoring males. Then you go to this next one. Let me go over here. This shows like marriageable age females that would be able to have babies and unmarried males. And look at this statistic. So you get into here and you have 280 men for every 100 women. And in India, it's 220 men. So do you understand the potential disruption that that's going to cause on geopolitics? So I have a whole series of things on digital ID. WHO came out with the digital ID, and the IMF and Bank for International Settlements. I'm going to just play you two clips of conferences held recently in Morocco. There was a conference, and one of the big people at the International Monetary Fund talked about what are we going to do about central bank digital currencies. I want you to listen to what she said about how they're going to roll this out.
If we are to be successful, CBDCs could not be fragmented national propositions. To have transactions more efficient and fairer. We need systems that connect countries. In other words, we need interoperability. And for this reason, at the IMF, we are working hard on the concept of a global CBDC platform to trade and to manage risks. And my colleague, Tobias Adrian, will talk more about it later.
Okay, and then China had a session for the World Economic Forum this past week. And one of the guys, an economist who spoke at that conference, I'll play a couple-minute clip of him. I want you to listen to how he sort of describes it like, well, it's a good thing, but it could be a really dark thing, central bank digital currencies and programmability, and how somebody could control things with this. So this is this article in the Epoch Times. You can also go to the Sociable, which is Tim Hinchcliffe's, I think his name is Hinchcliffe, blog about technology issues. Highly recommend that you read that occasionally. But, you know, hold on to your hat when you do so. So here's this guy speaking at the World Economic Forum in China this week. In China, they had this. They talked about artificial intelligence and all these other things. So listen to this guy. His name is, this was called the 14th Annual Meeting of the New Champions in Tianjin, China. This is Professor Eswar Prasad from Cornell University speaking about rolling out central bank digital currencies.
So both are connected. So if you mean by unique CBDC, a worldwide CBDC, that seems quite unlikely. I think we are not going to have a unification of money across countries. And ultimately, and this goes to the other question as well, money, whether it is provided in physical form or digital form, the value placed on it, the trust placed in it really depends on how trustworthy the institution that is issuing it is seen as. So if you have an incapable and non-credible central bank issuing digital currency, that by itself is not going to transform how credible that money is going to be. And CBDCs by themselves, again, are not going to displace any of the existing cross-border payment systems unless we think about multiple or cross-border CBDCs at the wholesale level. Those could play an effect. And as I mentioned, the Chinese cross-border interbank payment system provides one template in which you could have messaging tied in with the payment and settlement function rather than having an institution like SWIFT, which had a business model that was clearly vulnerable to technological disruption. What effect will all of this have on monetary policy? Now, that's an interesting question. If you think about stable coins, they're not creating an independent source of money, but if stable coins, if the existence of CBDCs undermines commercial banks, then we potentially have a problem. Because, in modern economies, central banks are not creating the most money. It is commercial banks. So if we have a situation about deposit intermediation from commercial banks, that poses a pretty serious risk. What role other types of payment mechanisms and non-traditional financial institutions play in finance will also affect the transmission and also the implementation of monetary policy. And the one final note I will make is that if you think about the benefits of digital money, there are huge potential gains. It's not just about digital forms of physical currency. You can have programmability. Units of central bank currency with expiry dates. You could have, as I argue in my book, a potentially better and some people might see it, or a darker world where the government decides that units of central bank money can be used to purchase some things, but not other things that it deems less desirable, like say ammunition or drugs or pornography or something of the sort. And that is very powerful in terms of the use of a CBDC, and I think also extremely dangerous for central banks. Because ultimately, if you have different units of central bank money with different characteristics, or if you use central bank money as a conduit for economic policies in a very targeted way, or more broadly for social policies, that could really affect the integrity of central bank money and the integrity and independence of central banks. So there are wonderful notions of things that can be done with digital money, but again, I fear that technology could take us to a better place, but equally has the potential to take us to a pretty dark place.
Great. Okay. Thank you very much.
So he studied, he wrote a book about it, and he says it could be dark. I mean, it could be very much control. Just two related stories and one quick video. So Nigel Farage, conservative in the UK, has said that all of his bank accounts have been closed and he can't find a new bank to replace them. Now, this would tie into what I'm telling you about what my banking friend told me this week, that the big banks are using diversity, equity, inclusion, and ESG scores to stop lending to people that don't fall in line with what they think. And then this was a Building Society of Yorkshire, which is a banking institution. A Church of England vicar had an account there. I saw an interview with him on GB News. You can find it on YouTube, I'm sure, or Rumble. And he said, look, the bank said, how are we doing? Give us your feedback. So he said, well, I don't really like all this trans and pride thing that you're doing. A couple days go by, he gets a letter from them. Our relationship is irretrievably broken. You're out of the bank in 14 days. Go someplace else. It seems to be kind of a crazy business model. But this is what happens when you put a lot of control in people and they get blinded by the religion that they've adopted. It's insane. But I'm sure that this is going to control. Everything seems to be pointing to 2030. And here is King Charles at a thing in London this week, putting in the countdown clock. Global renewables. Act today, save tomorrow. Tick tock. Time is running out. So that's the new king to limit global warming. To this, and nobody knows why they picked that number, other than that they thought that it was something that couldn't be achieved and they could control everything. So there's a lot of convergence of a lot of lines of Bible prophecy, global leadership, mark of the beast technology, geopolitics in the Middle East. If I have time this week, I apologize, I didn't do one last week. I did an interview with David Fiorazo on Stand Up for and Mary Danielson on Stand Up for the Truth past Tuesday. You can go to standupforthetruth.com and get that. And then Wednesday I also did a thing with Tom Hughes on Hope for Our Times. You can go to his app or his YouTube channel to find that, Hope for Our Times. I also did a thing that'll play on July 4th. We talked a little bit about where America is going. I'll be speaking with Tom and some others at a conference in San Marcos, California, July 21st and 22nd. You can go to hopeforourtimes.com, click on their events page, and you can. I think you need to register if you're going to come live. I don't know how many spaces they have. Tom said they still had some available. There's also a live stream option for a fairly nominal cost to help defray expenses on that regard. I think it's like $14.99, not $1,499, but $14.99. I think that's what it is. Don't quote me on that, but please sign up for that. I'll be doing a conference with Tom and some others in Rockwall, Texas. Olivier Melnick, who's been here many times. That's end of August. You can also see that on their page. I don't think registration is open for that. And then some of the talks from Scotland will be up on RTN TV and Moriel TV. So if you want to take a look at those. If I have time, I'll do a midweek update. I have a lot of things to say about a lot of things. You may find that hard to believe, but there's a lot going on. So I'll put up, this is my new favorite graphic of Israel. It's a sort of a 3D rendering of the land of Israel. And you can see Mount Hermon up there in the north, all the way down to the Dead Sea, the Jordan Valley. We'll talk about some of the Saudi peace plans that came out a year ago, the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan, which seems to be the way the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia is going. And remember, when the current king dies, I think you're going to see some big changes in regards to this whole, quote, Palestinian enterprise. That's just my opinion. I don't know if that'll happen. Right now, they are very respectful of the king's position, who's requiring a two-state solution. So I found that on Reddit. It's called Exaggerated 3D of Israel. And I just think it's a great graphic. I just love that. And somebody did a good job. So let's pray, and we'll resume the next time. Thanks. Lord, thanks for your word. Thank you for giving us information about the things that we can expect in these times. And Lord, I just pray that you will help us to take to heart the fact that we do live at a very unique time of human history, that the things that prophesied in the Bible seem to be on the verge of being fulfilled, and that we should be people that are wise and understanding, and we should be talking about these things in a gracious manner with those who might not agree with us, as we all try to figure this out, and to be people of wisdom. I pray that you'll help us to, as Paul said, told us to act like men and stand firm in the faith, and pray you'll give us the strength to do that and the power of the Holy Spirit to do that, and opportunities to share the gospel. Bless us this week in Jesus' name. Amen.